Integration builds on what we've already talked about, and thinks really pragmatically about where things go. So the online or the technology component can be placed before class. So it doesn't always have to be, because the obvious thought is you come into class, you do something, and then you go outside the class and you do something. But it doesn't necessarily have to be. In the example that you just gave, the idea of doing something, potentially you could do that out of class and then come into class. So it could precede what's happening in the class. And then you could also use technology inside the class. On the Dalblend website, Erin has this really interesting example of an instructor who used Twitter inside the classroom as the class was proceeding, which is really interesting. So she had a class, I don't know, 67, 80, so it wasn't huge, but large enough that a lot of students at a lower level are going to feel uncomfortable participating. So as she was lecturing, she would ask questions as the lecture was progressing, and then there was sort of like a Twitter thing that would come up, and they could all see that at the same time. So there's like these sort of two conversations going on. So there's a potential for in the class as well, so that integration of technology or some sort of online component within the face-to-face time. So but thinking about where that placement is really important for the integration. Then the piece that Adrian was talking about the connection, because, you know, I said that I used to always have stuff on Blackboard. They would go there and they would read the readings, or they might go there and look at the lecture from last week and stuff. But I wouldn't then necessarily in the course say, okay, what you did out there comes back in here. But in a true blend, whatever happens in both places goes backwards and forwards. So there's this continuing connection between what's in the class and what's outside of the class. I have to say, I find that challenging. But that may be because I have other people sort of facilitating on the outside. And then the other component is, how do you get students in a mind frame to do that successfully? What kind of preparation do they need? Do you ramp things up over time, or do you sort of throw them in at the deep end but give them lots of support around what they need to do, depending on what it is you're doing? So some examples would be that post-lecture quiz would be post, obviously, but to that continuous part, if you did a quiz that then provides technological calculation of the quiz right away, then the student's getting that continuous feedback even before they come back to the class. In a smaller class, it might even be possible to look at the quizzes and say, there's a problem. Everybody's having the same problem with question number 6. So I'm not going to go over the whole quiz and task, but I'm going to bring question 6 back in to the class. So that would be one way of making those connections. There could be reading online that students have to prepare for problems or cases in the class. So part of the student preparation is they absolutely have to have read it before they come into the class. So one way to do that is then to put the quiz at the beginning of the face-to-face class that's graded. So you're not really grading something online, but you're grading that you are, but you're doing it in the face-to-face context. Another way of thinking about it would be the post-lecture discussion. That, as we discussed, does need to sort of be focused and facilitated and monitored in some way so that it's meaningful. So that could be what was lectured about in class is discussed online, and then perhaps key issues of interest or key problems can be revisited. Or perhaps a group has a responsibility for a blog or a wiki or a discussion forum. A particular group has a responsibility for each week. Again, it depends on the size of the class. You could do a sort of flipped video. So the video, you could put a video online that contains questions, critical thinking questions. You could get students to create their own video responses to it. Again, you wouldn't want to look at 300 videos. But with 30 students, you know, if you ask them to do like a 2-minute response and it was graded, that could be something that was graded. And increasingly, there are really easy ways to get students to just do a little video on their computer and put it up onto the site. So what could you do face-to-face? What would you do online is one question. the other question is, how do you make that continual flow between the online and the face-to-face, and then student preparation for that, which can mean giving them skills, but it can also mean assessing in appropriate ways that gets them moving along, which does give them that framework, even though there's independence of, flexibility of time. Maybe we could start with student preparation, how you might prepare students. All right, so flexibility refers on the one hand to the when and where students learn and the accessibility of material. So that's all good. But the flip side of the flexibility, so part of the decisions is, what, where, and how much where. But then that implies that the balance of time can change in a course as well. So if you have a 3-hour face-to-face class, would you make it a 2-hour face-to-face class and push the other hour out online and expect that? Or, for example, if you had 2 1.5-hour classes, would you take that 1.5 hour, that's the face-to-face, and the 1.5 hour is online, flexibly accessible through the course of the week, maybe with some deadlines? So last year they did this study at York University that suggested the design of a blended course is properly balanced and delivered to students on a fixed schedule so that the weight of the blend doesn't change from week to week. So that actually hadn't occurred to me before, but apparently that, sometimes there's no blend, and there is, and there isn't, that students find that completely discombobulating. So if there's that regularity, and if it's properly balanced, and what they found, so they kind of were looking at what is the good balance between the face-to-face and the online. And they did 80 online, 50 online, 30 online, % of the time online. And what they found was that both student satisfaction and from a student learning perspective, the 30% blend was the best, because students still wanted a bulk of face-to-face, particularly in lower level classes. But York is a very highly commuter university. So if you've got 3 hours a week, 2 1.5-hour classes on Tuesday and Thursday, and now you only have to come on Tuesday all the way up to York, that was way preferable for students. So that flexibility was there, the face-to-face was retained, and students could do learning online at their own time and their own pace. They found that as they increased the amount of time online, students couldn't direct them, especially earlier level students couldn't direct themselves so well. So when it got to 80%, it was too much, especially when, and I thought this was particularly interesting, students came into the course. So if you choose a course and you know it's an online course, you know it's an online course. And if you choose a course from the university, you know you're going to go to class. But what they were finding was increasingly students, instructors are blending courses. And students were, well, I didn't sign up for an online course. I signed up for a face-to-face course. And now I have to do this online. And that's, students were particularly resistant to that if the online component was really high. If it was in that 30% range, that seemed to be sort of acceptable when they didn't know beforehand, although I must admit this research project suggested that blended courses should be identified in the calendar, which I thought, and it's like, that's a thought, because they said some students will self-select in and some will self-select out because they already know, yeah, it's flexible and that's going to mean I'm never going to do it, no matter what, fail-safes you put into place. So given all of that, the questions are, what percentage of time do you put online? What percentage of your time do you put in the face-to-face? Given the time you're given by the university or your department in the face-to-face, will you eliminate any of it, of that time, and push it out to the online? And if you do that, are there any particular concerns around your students, either for flexibility or for independent work? Which I think most of you will be familiar with. So I'll just go through it quickly, and then we'll have a discussion about, what kind of impact it might have. So I do have a slide about writing learning outcomes, a couple of slides about learning to write outcomes. But what I wanted to focus on, I think I'll focus on actually, is about the kinds of outcomes we have in our courses and whether we can shift what the student learning outcomes may be based on the kind of outcomes we have using a blended context. So most of you are familiar with Bloom's taxonomy. So this is the flipped pyramid. So the idea being remembering is less, and analysis, evaluation, and creation we spend more time on, which might be something for you guys to think about with that animal course. In addition, though, Bloom has these other two outcome domains, which I think are really important to think about. What we physically do, so skill development, what role does that play in our course? And then also the affective domain, which refers to attitudes, beliefs, and values, which may be probably more relevant for your two courses. We don't tend to think about these in quite the same way as we do cognitive development, but I think it is really important, you know, watching somebody do it, doing something yourself, receiving other people's ideas and values and beliefs, and then to the point where we can know what our own values and beliefs are and apply them in particular contexts. So I think that's really important to think about in terms of what are the outcomes of our courses. And beyond Bloom, DFINC has a taxonomy of significant learning which incorporates all of Bloom but adds some other things, including integration within and across disciplines, human dimension of significant learning. Well, who does it impact? How does it change me? The caring aspect, why should I care about this discipline? And learning how to learn. So it's that skill development piece that connects with lifelong learning. So I'm introducing these only so that we're having a conversation about really a broad definition of outcomes, and thinking about from such a broad definition, could we then rethink using a blended learning format? Can we rethink, can we add, can we change our learning outcomes or expand our learning outcomes in a way that we can't without a blended context? So thinking about the learning outcomes that your course already has, will any of your learning outcomes change as a result of taking a blended learning approach? I'm not saying that has to happen. You could just do the outcomes that you already have better. But I think it's still a question to ask. Will you add any new learning outcomes as a result of taking a blended approach to course design? And finally, how could blended learning enhance your students' ability to achieve the learning outcomes in your course? I think that's an important question, because we shouldn't just blend a course because it seems like a cool thing to do, but that it actually might enhance students' learning in some way.